Eli Turner sat quietly in his small, cramped studio, the walls covered in vivid paintings, sketches, and sculptures that he had poured his soul into. The light of the late afternoon filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the workbench, where an unfinished canvas lay waiting for its next stroke. The room smelled of oil paints, turpentine, and the remnants of a coffee he had long since forgotten. His hands, still stained from his work earlier in the day, rested on his knees as he stared at the piece before him. It was a self-portrait, but not in the conventional sense. His face was distorted, abstract, and layered in a manner that hinted at his personal struggles, his journey as a black artist trying to find his place in a world that often overlooked people like him. The piece was filled with chaotic swirls of color, sharp contrasts of light and dark, each stroke telling a story of rejection, hardship, and hope. It was his voice, a voice that the world hadn't heard yet, but one that he was determined to make it listen. Eli had always been an artist. It was in his blood, and the act of creation was the only way he knew how to express the world that often refused to understand him. His art was unique, filled with raw emotion and unspoken truths, but the world didn't know his worth. Not yet. He had spent the last few years hopping from local markets to small art fairs, hoping to sell just enough pieces to cover his rent and buy new supplies. Despite his talent and passion, the rejections were constant, the praise scarce. The galleries never came calling. He had tried to break into the mainstream art world, but the doors were always closed to him. He had once read an article about the top art dealers in the city, men and women with wealth and influence who controlled the very fabric of the art world. Eli's name was never on those lists. Instead, the same names, the same faces, kept appearing in every prestigious exhibition and auction. The thought had crossed his mind more than once, was it his art, or was it the color of his skin? But Eli didn't have the luxury of self-pity. He couldn't afford to let the world's indifference stop him. Each rejection, each failed attempt, only fueled his desire to push harder. His art was his message to the world, a world that might not yet see its value, but he would keep showing up, because he knew one thing, eventually, someone would notice. Today, Eli decided to take another step. He had heard of a gallery in the heart of the city, a place that housed the kind of artists whose names were whispered in high society. Gregory Belmont's gallery was known for only showing the most exclusive and in-demand artists, those with connections and reputations. It was a long shot, but Eli had to try. He packed his best works into his portfolio, determined to present them in the most professional way he could manage. He had nothing left to lose. The gallery owner, Gregory Belmont. Gregory Belmont was the epitome of the high-end art world. A tall, impeccably dressed man with a sharp jawline and meticulously combed silver hair, Gregory exuded an air of wealth and entitlement. His gallery was located in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods, surrounded by the city's elite. Inside, it was pristine, gleaming white walls, expensive lighting highlighting the works of famous artists, and the faint scent of polished wood mixed with the fragrance of freshly cut flowers arranged in crystal vases. Belmont was known for one thing, exclusivity. He would only display the works of artists who had a certain pedigree, those who could afford the entrance fee or had the right connections. The right artists were those who had been vetted by prestigious art schools, whose names carried weight in auctions and private sales. It was a world of wealth, power, and snobbery, and Gregory reveled in it. His gallery was not for the common artist, the one who made their work in a cramped studio or who didn't fit into the mold of the art world elite. No, Gregory Belmont was only interested in artists whose works sold for millions, whose names were in demand at international auctions. It was a business, nothing more. Gregory didn't see art as a form of self-expression. To him, it was a commodity, an object of desire, for the wealthy and privileged. The artist was secondary to the market value. He'd built his career on spotting trends before they became trends, on showcasing the kind of art that was in and discarding everything else. The underprivileged, the unknowns, the less fashionable? They simply didn't have a place in his world. And so, Gregory continued to cultivate his empire, enjoying the perks of wealth and the satisfaction of knowing he was seen as a tastemaker in the art community. There was no room for anything that might challenge his carefully curated vision of success. The first encounter. Eli entered the gallery, his heart racing in his chest. The cool air inside was a sharp contrast to the sticky summer heat he had just stepped out of. His shoes clicked softly on the marble floor as he made his way toward the reception desk. The assistant, a young woman with bright red lipstick, barely glanced up from her phone when Eli arrived. She looked at him with an almost bored expression, clearly uninterested in the new visitor. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone flat. Eli cleared his throat, forcing himself to sound confident. "I'm here to see Mr. Belmont. I'm an artist, and I'd like to show him some of my work." The assistant raised an eyebrow, as if to say this should be interesting. "Mr. Belmont is very busy, but I'll let him know you're here." She dialed a number on the phone without another word. Eli waited, feeling a bit out of place in the polished environment. His clothes were simple, not the designer suits that filled the gallery, and his hands were stained with the remnants of his work. But he couldn't back out now. This was his chance. A few minutes later, Gregory Belmont himself appeared, striding into the room with the same air of arrogance that Eli had seen so many times in the art world. He looked Eli up and down, his lips curling into a faint, dismissive smile. "You must be the artist," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "What's your name?" "Eli Turner," Eli said, his voice steady, despite the knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. Gregory nodded, though his eyes never left Eli's clothing, his unkempt appearance. "Well, I'm sure you've heard of the kind of work we showcase here," he began, his tone casual, almost mocking. "We don't typically show, well, let's say, unconventional artists." Eli tried to keep his composure. "I understand. But I think you'll find my work is unlike anything you've seen before." Gregory chuckled softly, a dismissive laugh that echoed through the gallery's vast space. "Sure, kid. We've had plenty of unconventional artists come through here. They all think their work is special. But let me tell you something, nobody's interested in another abstract painting by a starving artist with no connections." Eli's heart sank. The words stung more than he expected, but he held his ground. He opened his portfolio and began laying out a few of his best pieces, vivid portraits, powerful, raw interpretations of human struggles. Each piece had a story, a message that went beyond the paint. He waited, but Gregory didn't even look at the pieces. He barely glanced at the canvas, before turning back to Eli. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Gregory said, shaking his head. "Unoriginal. Chaotic. It's just more of the same. Art like this won't sell in my gallery. You're wasting your time." Eli's face burned with frustration, but he kept his voice steady. "It's not about selling. It's about the message." Gregory shrugged, turning away dismissively. "Well, kid, you can keep that message. But it's not going to get you anywhere here." Eli packed up his portfolio, his hands trembling, but his resolve hardening. He didn't belong here, not in Gregory's world, but he didn't need Gregory's approval to make it. He left the gallery with his head held high, walking past the luxurious displays of artists who fit the mold Gregory demanded. Eli's determination. As Eli stepped back out onto the bustling city street, the weight of the encounter settled heavily on his shoulders. The rejection stung more than he wanted to admit. But as he walked, something inside him began to shift. Eli had always known the world wasn't fair. He had faced discrimination from the start, his skin, his background, his art, it was all seen as lesser by people like Gregory. But the encounter only solidified his belief in one thing, his art was his voice, and it was meant to be heard. He didn't need Gregory Belmont's approval. He didn't need the art world to validate him. He had his passion, his creativity, and the message that burned inside him. And that was enough. The rejection, the mockery, it only fueled his determination. He would keep pushing. He would keep creating. One day, the world would see his worth. And when that day came, Gregory Belmont would be the one left in the dust, Eli's artistic evolution. Back in the solitude of his small studio, Eli Turner sat in front of his latest canvas, reflecting on the encounter with Gregory Belmont. The sting of rejection still lingered, but it was becoming fuel for his fire. He didn't need to prove anything to Gregory, or to anyone else in the elitist circles that ran the art world. His art had a power all its own, and he knew it was time to take it to the next level. Eli didn't just paint to express himself anymore, he painted to challenge the very fabric of society, to tear down the walls of inequality, and to amplify voices that had long been silenced. His latest series of works reflected this shift, bold, powerful pieces that challenged everything the art world had come to expect. He began to use mixed media, blending paint with fabric, scrap metal, and even elements of the urban streets that had shaped his life. His canvases were filled with vibrant colors that exploded off the surface, each one telling a story of pain, resilience, and hope. He didn't just want to make art that would be admired, he wanted to make art that would make people think, feel, and question the world around them. His art wasn't just pretty, it was purposeful. Each stroke of color, each layer of texture, carried a message that had been bubbling up inside him for years. He used his work to speak about the Black experience, about oppression, about resilience, and most of all, about the power of change. Days turned into weeks as Eli pushed himself further, experimenting with new techniques and ideas. He studied the greats, not just in painting but in other forms of art and activism, those who used their platforms to create real, meaningful change. Every time he picked up his brush, he felt closer to his purpose. His work began to take on a life of its own, vibrant and fierce, pulling the viewer into its depths. The local art scene began to notice. At first, it was small. A few collectors bought some of his work at local markets, recognizing something special in his pieces. Then, it was the art fairs, where his works were displayed in a row with other emerging artists. The buzz around Eli grew louder, as whispers spread about a new artist who was breaking through the boundaries of what art could be. Social media began to pick up on his work too. His paintings resonated with a younger, more diverse generation, one that was hungry for art that spoke to the issues of today, not just the past. Eli didn't have a PR team or the marketing budget that bigger names had, but what he had was real, raw talent, and people were beginning to see it. His Instagram account, once just a few close friends and family, now had hundreds of followers. They weren't just art collectors, they were people who saw themselves in his work. They shared his posts, they commented, they tagged their friends. Slowly, his art was spreading across the internet like wildfire, catching the attention of people far beyond his local community. Breaking through the art world. Eli's social media presence exploded over the next few months. His work was shared by influencers, art lovers, and even activists who saw the power in his art. A photograph of his piece titled Resilience, a mixed-media portrait of a young Black woman standing tall amidst a storm of chaotic lines and colors, went viral. People from all walks of life shared it, their voices rising in solidarity with the message Eli had put on canvas. His work, which had started as a reflection of his own struggles, now became a symbol of empowerment for many. The buzz around Eli grew exponentially, attracting the attention of one of the most respected critics in the art world, Lena Harris. Lena was known for her sharp insights into art and culture, but she wasn't just any critic, she was a trailblazer in her own right, having gained recognition for her focus on elevating marginalized voices in art. She had a keen eye for talent, and when she saw Eli's work online, she knew she had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Eli received an email one day, completely out of the blue. "Dear Mr. Turner, I recently came across your work, and I must say, I am truly impressed by the depth and emotion in your pieces. I would love to feature your work in an upcoming article. Yours is the kind of art the world needs to see." Eli was stunned. Lena Harris was one of the most influential voices in the art world, and for her to take an interest in him, an artist who had just a few months ago been mocked by a gallery owner, was a surreal moment of validation. He agreed to the interview without hesitation, eager to share his story and the meaning behind his art. When Lena's article was published, the impact was immediate. The review was glowing. She described Eli's art as a revolutionary force in the modern art scene, praising his ability to blend personal history with universal themes. She noted that his use of color, texture, and media was groundbreaking, challenging the conventional boundaries of what art was expected to be. Most importantly, she called Eli a visionary who had found a way to communicate profound truths through his work, making it accessible to a broader audience. The piece went viral, too. Within days, Eli was being contacted by galleries across the country, with offers to exhibit his work in their spaces. Art collectors, some of whom had never paid attention to emerging artists, were now eager to acquire his pieces. His follower count on social media skyrocketed, and the world began to take notice of the artist who had once been overlooked. Success and recognition. With the exposure from Lena Harris's article, Eli's career began to soar. His phone rang constantly with offers from galleries and collectors, eager to secure his work. It was a whirlwind, and at times Eli felt like he was barely keeping up with the demand. But he was ready for it. His work, which had started as an expression of his inner turmoil, now resonated with people on a global scale. His message of empowerment and change struck a chord with people from all walks of life. One of the first major milestones came when Eli was invited to showcase his work at a prestigious art gallery in New York City, one of the largest and most well-respected venues in the country. The invitation was a testament to how far he had come. Eli had once dreamt of showing his art in such a space, but now it was reality. The exhibit was a resounding success. Critics, collectors, and fellow artists flocked to see his work. Some pieces sold for tens of thousands of dollars, and one of his most famous paintings, Breaking Free, a powerful depiction of a young black man breaking chains, was sold to a private collector for over $1 million. Eli's name was now known across the art world, and his reputation as one of the most innovative artists of his generation was firmly established. But the success didn't stop there. Eli's work was featured in major art magazines, and he was invited to speak at international art conferences. People from all over the world were clamoring to see his pieces, and Eli's vision began to influence a new generation of artists. His message of change, empowerment, and resilience resonated deeply, and he became a role model to many. Gregory's struggle. While Eli's career was soaring, Gregory Belmont's world was beginning to crumble. His gallery, which had once been the go-to place for exclusive, high-priced art, was now struggling to maintain its relevance. His refusal to diversify his offerings had alienated a large portion of the art-buying public, particularly younger, more progressive buyers who were now turning to artists like Eli for their inspiration. Gregory had stuck to his old ways for too long, relying on the same handful of established artists who were now starting to fade in popularity. The market for the kind of elitist, high-end art he sold was shrinking, and the younger generation, with their tastes for more diverse, meaningful art, had no interest in the works his gallery had to offer. Gregory tried to keep his gallery afloat by focusing on the big names, the ones with million-dollar price tags, but the buyers were fewer and farther between. Meanwhile, Eli's name was everywhere. It wasn't just the art world that was buzzing about him, it was mainstream media, social media, and the global audience. People wanted Eli's art not just for its monetary value, but for the powerful message it carried. Gregory couldn't help but notice the younger, more diverse artists gaining traction. It was frustrating. For years, he had been at the top of the art world, but now it seemed like the tides were shifting, and he was being left behind. He tried to tell himself it was just a trend, but deep down, he knew that something had changed. And in the back of his mind, there was always the thought, what if Eli was right all along? The realization was slowly dawning on Gregory, perhaps he had underestimated the power of true art, and maybe the world was ready for something more than what he had been offering. A turning point for Gregory. Gregory Belmont sat at his large desk, a towering figure of authority, in his sleek, modern office. His gaze wandered to the half-empty walls of his gallery across town, where once the most coveted works of the elite had hung, each piece bringing in millions of dollars. But now, as his gallery struggled to fill its roster for the upcoming art auction, the reality of his situation was beginning to sink in. The grand success he had once taken for granted was slipping through his fingers. The auction, which had once been a surefire moneymaker for Gregory, was looming on the horizon. High-profile buyers and collectors would be there, but his roster of artists for the event was embarrassingly thin. His gallery had a reputation for being selective, for showcasing only the most sought-after artists, but that reputation was quickly becoming a double-edged sword. The art world had changed, and Gregory had been slow to adapt. The young, diverse voices that were now gaining traction were nowhere to be found in his gallery, and that was a problem. He had spent years catering to an exclusive clientele, those who valued status over substance, art as a luxury, not a message. Now, those same clients were turning their attention to new artists, ones who spoke to the current moment. The tides were shifting, and Gregory knew he had to adjust quickly. He needed a breakthrough, something that would bring his gallery back into the spotlight. Then, it happened. Word began to spread about Eli Turner. The once unknown artist who had been dismissed so casually by Gregory was now being hailed as one of the most important emerging voices in contemporary art. His works were selling for astronomical prices. Social media influencers were sharing his paintings. Prominent critics like Lena Harris had written glowing reviews. Eli was everywhere. Gregory's assistant had mentioned Eli's name in passing just a few days ago, but now it was all he could think about. Eli was no longer just another struggling artist. He was a sensation. And Gregory needed him. With his pride on the line and his gallery's future hanging in the balance, Gregory decided to act. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Get me Eli Turner's contact information," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Set up a meeting. Make it sound exclusive. I need him in my gallery, and I need him now." The assistant hesitated for only a moment, then responded. "Of course, Mr. Belmont." The unexpected meeting. Eli Turner had come a long way since his first visit to Gregory Belmont's gallery. No longer the young artist seeking validation, he had become a force in the art world. His reputation had soared to unprecedented heights, and his work had garnered not just attention but respect. The rejection he had faced from Gregory now seemed like a distant memory, a catalyst for the growth that had followed. When Gregory's assistant called to arrange the meeting, Eli had been hesitant at first. Why would he go back to the place that had once mocked him? But curiosity got the better of him. Gregory Belmont, the man who had dismissed his work without a second glance, now wanted to meet with him. Eli couldn't help but wonder why. He arrived at the gallery with a sense of calm confidence. The polished floors, the sleek lighting, the expensive displays, it all seemed so much more artificial to him now. He had seen the world of elite art collectors and dealers for what it was, a market. His work had value beyond the walls of places like this, but if this meeting was to take place, he would make sure Gregory knew that he held all the cards. When Gregory greeted him at the door, Eli couldn't help but notice the change in the man. Gone was the arrogance, the dismissiveness. In its place was a forced politeness, a hint of nervousness, and something else, regret. "Eli, it's good to see you," Gregory said, offering a handshake. His grip was firm, but Eli could feel the tension. "I must say, your work has been causing quite a stir. I've been following your success closely. I wanted to apologize for my earlier behavior. I misjudged you." Eli took a moment before shaking Gregory's hand, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate that," he said, his voice steady. "But you're not the first person to misjudge me, and you probably won't be the last." Gregory seemed to take a breath, almost as if he were steeling himself for what was to come. "I want to offer you something, Eli. A chance to showcase your work at our upcoming auction. It's a big opportunity, and I believe it could benefit both of us. You've built quite a name for yourself, and we'd be honored to have your pieces in our collection." Eli raised an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering. "And what's in it for me?" Gregory seemed caught off guard by the question, but he quickly recovered. "I'm offering you exposure, access to the highest level of collectors and buyers. You'll be featured prominently in the auction catalog." Your work will be seen by some of the most influential people in the art world. Eli considered this for a moment, then let out a soft laugh. You're offering me the same thing you rejected me for. But now that my work is valuable, you want to cash in. Gregory stiffened, but Eli could see the gears turning in his head. The desperation was palpable. I understand if you're upset about how things went the last time we met, Gregory said. But I'm offering you a real chance. You've proven yourself, and I'm willing to acknowledge that. I want to make it right. Eli tilted his head, studying Gregory. You're offering me a seat at the table, but I'm the one who's going to be doing the talking. You need me, Gregory. I don't need you. A power shift. The realization hit Gregory with full force. Eli wasn't the same artist who had walked into his gallery months ago. This new Eli was confident, self-assured, and fully aware of the power he wielded in the current art market. Gregory had always been the one who called the shots, but now, for the first time, he saw how much control Eli had. Eli leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Gregory's. I know what you're trying to do, he said. But it's not going to be that easy. You want me to showcase my work at your auction? Fine. But I'm not doing it on your terms. You'll work on mine. Gregory's face twitched. What exactly are you asking for? Eli's voice was calm, but there was a sharpness in his words. I'm asking for a high commission on any sale, not the standard cut you usually take. I want the right to showcase my work independently, not as part of a larger group of artists you're peddling. And most importantly, I want a seat at the table when decisions are being made about the gallery's direction. This isn't just about selling art, it's about creating a legacy. Gregory's mouth went dry. The terms Eli was laying out were far beyond what he had expected. But there was no denying the truth. Eli had become a hot commodity in the art world, and if he wanted to bring his work to the gallery, Gregory had no choice but to comply. I see, Gregory said slowly. You've made your demands clear. I'll need some time to think about it. Eli smiled slightly, the power dynamic completely shifted. You don't have time, Gregory. The auction is just weeks away, and you know you need me. If you want my work in your collection, these are my terms. Gregory swallowed hard, his pride wounded but his desire to succeed even stronger. He finally nodded. All right. We'll make it work. I'll agree to your terms. The deal is struck. The deal was sealed, but there was an underlying tension in the air as Gregory realized the true implications of what had just transpired. Eli Turner had not just become an artist with power, he had become the artist. Gregory, once the undisputed gatekeeper of the art world, was now at the mercy of the very artist he had once dismissed. As Eli left the gallery that day, his mind raced with possibilities. He had done it. He had taken control of his destiny, and for the first time, he was making the art world come to him. He had turned his pain and rejection into power, and now the world would have no choice but to listen. Gregory, on the other hand, sat at his desk, staring at the signed agreement in front of him. He had won, in a sense. He had secured Eli's participation in the auction, ensuring that his gallery would remain relevant for the time being. But in the quiet of his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in the art world, but within himself. He had been humbled, and he knew deep down that he would never be the same again. Eli had proven that true power didn't come from wealth or status, it came from authenticity, from speaking your truth and standing firm in it. And Gregory Belmont, for all his wealth and influence, was learning that lesson the hard way. A new era for the gallery. The opening night of Eli Turner's first exhibit at Gregory Belmont's gallery was nothing short of a spectacle. The space, which had once been reserved for high-end, exclusive artists, was now filled with the buzz of excitement surrounding Eli's work. Art collectors, critics, and influencers all gathered in the gallery, eager to see the pieces that had taken the art world by storm. Eli's name was now synonymous with innovation, and his work was in high demand. As the guests wandered through the gallery, they were captivated by the sheer power of Eli's art. His mixed media portraits and abstract pieces, each filled with layers of color, texture, and emotion, took center stage. The themes of struggle, resilience, and empowerment resonated deeply with the diverse crowd. The response was overwhelming. People lined up to bid on his pieces, some even willing to pay record-breaking sums. One piece, Breaking the Chains, a powerful portrayal of a black woman emerging from a web of metallic chains, sold for a staggering $5 million. The crowd gasped in disbelief, but Eli's work had proven time and time again that it was more than just art, it was a movement. His paintings were not merely objects to be admired, they were symbols of something much deeper, something people could connect with on a personal level. Gregory watched from the sidelines, his heart racing with a mixture of pride and disbelief. He had never imagined that the artist he had once dismissed would not only bring him success, but elevate his gallery to new heights. The auction room buzzed with energy as Eli's work sold for millions, and the gallery was flooded with patrons eager to own a piece of the future. Eli, meanwhile, stood among the guests, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the frenzy around him. He had seen this kind of attention before in his dreams, but now it was real. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a cultural icon. His work had a life of its own, and it was changing the art world one piece at a time. As the night came to a close, Gregory approached Eli, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This is incredible, Eli, he said, his voice filled with awe. You've transformed everything. Eli nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. This is just the beginning, Gregory. Art can do more than make money, it can make a difference. The success of the exhibit was just the start. Eli's influence only grew from there, and soon his name became a staple in art circles, appearing in major publications and on the covers of art magazines. Gregory's gallery, once teetering on the brink of obscurity, was now the most talked about space in the city. People came from all over the world to see Eli's work, and by extension, the gallery became a destination for new collectors, curators, and artists alike. It was a new era for Gregory Belmont's gallery, and it was all thanks to Eli Turner. Gregory's internal conflict. Despite the success, Gregory couldn't shake the discomfort that gnawed at him from within. As Eli's star continued to rise, Gregory's ego, bruised by his previous dismissal of the artist, remained unsettled. He had spent years cultivating his reputation as an arbiter of taste in the art world, and yet here was this young man, an artist he had once mocked, turning everything he thought he knew on its head. Gregory found himself struggling with the truth. Eli's success wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't some passing trend. Eli's art was authentic, revolutionary, and deeply impactful. It was everything Gregory had once claimed to appreciate in art, but it was being presented by someone who didn't fit the mold of what Gregory thought an artist should be. He had been wrong, about Eli, about his art, and about the direction the art world was headed. He would catch himself staring at Eli, his pride now a source of regret. There were moments when Gregory would overhear conversations about how Eli's work had changed people's lives, how it had challenged the establishment and pushed boundaries. He had once believed that the only way to succeed in the art world was through wealth, prestige, and exclusivity. But now, as he watched Eli lead the charge for a more inclusive, authentic vision of art, he couldn't help but feel humbled. He had become a spectator in his own gallery, watching a young artist take the reins. And though Gregory was undoubtedly profiting from Eli's success, part of him resented the fact that his own pride had nearly cost him the opportunity to work with someone as brilliant as Eli. Eli's legacy. Eli's success in the art world wasn't just about the money or the fame, it was about using his platform to create real, lasting change. As his career skyrocketed, he began to focus on giving back, using his newfound influence to help others who had been overlooked and marginalized in the art world. Eli established a foundation that funded scholarships for young artists of color, ensuring that the next generation of talent wouldn't face the same obstacles he had. He also organized charity events, using his exhibitions as a platform to raise funds for social justice causes. His work, which had always been about empowerment, now became a vehicle for even greater impact. At every turn, Eli made it clear that success was not just about individual achievement, It was about lifting others up and creating opportunities for those who had been shut out of the art world for too long. He mentored young artists, offering guidance and encouragement, and always made sure that his success was shared with others. He became a vocal advocate for diversity and representation, both in art and in the broader cultural landscape. His influence extended far beyond the gallery walls, as he used his visibility to push for systemic change in the art world. Eli didn't just want to be remembered for his art, he wanted to be remembered for the doors he had opened for others. Full circle moment. As the months passed, Eli's influence over Gregory's gallery grew. Though Gregory still held the title of gallery owner, it was clear to everyone that Eli's vision was the one that shaped the direction of the space. He wasn't just a featured artist, he had become a key decision-maker, with a seat at the table when it came to selecting which artists would be showcased and what direction the gallery would take moving forward. Eli's impact on the gallery was undeniable. His name alone drew in crowds, but it was his artistic vision and commitment to diversity that had transformed the space. Gregory, though still wealthy and influential, had learned a lesson in humility. He realized that the art world wasn't just about wealth and prestige, it was about authenticity, passion, and a willingness to take risks. In many ways, the gallery had come full circle. Gregory had once been the gatekeeper, deciding who was worthy of success. But now, Eli had become the catalyst for change. The gallery's offerings were now more diverse, showcasing the works of underrepresented artists and pushing boundaries in ways that Gregory had never thought possible. Gregory had learned to appreciate the authenticity of art, not just its marketability, and he knew that the gallery's future lay in embracing the voices that had once been ignored.